Hey everybody, it is Kellen Nitro for Nitromaniac TV's Wrestling Unlimited, and this is my take on the 1989 NWA WCW Great American Bash from the Baltimore Arena in Baltimore, Maryland on July 23rd, 1989. This is my WWE Super Showdown WWE Replacement Show, hashtag WWE Replacement Show, I should say. I stand united with a lot of the wrestling YouTubers and podcasters and opinion columnists and bloggers out there that did not review Super Showdown due to the event being held in Saudi Arabia and all the factors around that. Ergo, a lot of people boycotted that event this time around. I stand with them. I put up on my Twitter account last week at Kellen Nitro a poll for which classic pay-per-view you guys would like me to do my Nitros take on and give opinions and a little bit of a review on over Super Showdown weekend, on the Friday and the Saturday. And man, that poll was exciting because we actually went to a tiebreaker. It was a freeway tie between Ring of Honor's classic Joe versus Kabashi card from 2005, the 1995 King of the Ring, and this one from 1989. And in the tiebreak, this one won by I don't want to say a landslide, but there was a surprising write-in vote that was kind of spearheaded by my art guy, R-Plane, down in Seattle. And he decided to get ECW's December to Dismember a little bit of some love, and it garnered about 3 or 4 write-in votes, which unfortunately it needed about 7 or 8 to take the poll, but ergo, maybe later on, if I decide to make this kind of a full-time addition to the channel, and if you guys like this sort of stuff, let me know in the comments below, and I can do more. We'll do more classic pay-per-views such as this. Maybe make it a once-a-month type thing. Who knows? But let's get through this one first and see how it's like. As I mentioned in the open, the Great American Bash 1989 was the 5th annual Great American Bash pay-per-view produced by World Championship Wrestling under the National Wrestling Alliance NWA banner, and the event took place on July 23rd, 1989 at the Baltimore Arena in Baltimore, Maryland. And this was a packed house. Attendance was 14,500. You watch the show, it looks full. It doesn't look like there's an empty seat in the house. NWA/WCW ran a lot of the Great American Bash pay-per-views from Baltimore in the coming years. Of course, there's the infamous 1991 Great American Bash pay-per-view that was from Baltimore. 1996, I know for sure, was from Baltimore, and I think 97 as well. I'd have to go back in my records and see. Maybe even 98 as well, because Baltimore kind of became the semi-permanent home of the Great American Bash pay-per-views, and they still run wrestling out of that arena today. It's the Royal Farms Arena now in Baltimore, and it's just one of the great wrestling buildings in the United States, just history-wise, and this event added to its legacy. It's a 9-match card. The pay-per-view itself, if you watch it on the WWE Network, runs you about 2 hours 43, 2 hours 44, somewhere along that ballpark. But it's a quality 2 hours and 44. It's not like watching Monday Night Raw now. All right, our inaugural contest of the Great American Bash 1989 was the 2-ring King of the Hill Battle Royal. This is to take advantage, I think, of 2 things. One, getting a lot of guys on the card that wouldn't normally be on a card like this and giving them kind of a little bit of a shot on a payday. Maybe rounding out the roster a little bit and bringing in all of the NWA/WCW wrestlers at the time and put them on the card. And number 2, there were 2 rings set up in the arena for War Games later on that night in the card, and we'll go over the teams for that when we get to that match. But they had to set up, and they've been running qualifying battle royals throughout the month before at various house shows and everything like that. So you took 14 winners from 14 different battle royals held on 14 different house shows in the month leading up to the Great American Bash and put them in this for a kayfabe sum of $50,000 going to the winner. Here are the participants in this thing. You had Dangerous Dan Spivey, Sid Vicious, so you had the newly formed Skyscrapers tag team in there. They would play an important role in this match. Wild Bill Irwin, Flying Brian Pillman, Eddie Gilbert, Kevin Sullivan, Mike Rotunda, Ranger Ross, there's a NWA WCW name from the past for you guys. Rick Steiner, Ron Simmons, Scott Hall, Scott Steiner, Dr. Def Steve Williams, and Terry Bam Bam Gordy of the Fabulous Freebirds. And again, all 14 of them, they start in one ring, you get tossed out into another ring, and then there's one guy left in ring 1, and then when he's left in ring 1, have everybody else in ring 2 fighting to stay in the battle royal. Then they get tossed out over the top rope in ring 2 to get eliminated, and then the sole survivor in ring 1 takes on the sole survivor in ring 2. They're just building the skyscrapers at this point for this match. So Sid ends up winning the battle royal in ring 1. Dan Spivey ends up winning the battle royal in ring 2. So you think, hey, tag partners are going to collide. Wait a second, player. Their new manager, Teddy Long, who's been watching from the entrance ramp the entire time, comes down and says, holla, 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 I got myself a tag. Long confronts one of the referees at ringside, brings him into the ring, and brings up the ring announcer, to which Spivey snatches the ceremonial crown that the winner was going to get for this, it being a King of the Hill Battle Royal, and Sid snatches the check for 50 grand, and they say all 3 of them are going to split it, and they exit the ring. So basically, the match ends in a no contest, which is a first for a battle royal. And yeah, it's as bad as it sounds. Meltzer gave it surprisingly a 3-star rating. So that came off as average at the time. But if you watch it now in 2019 eyes, it kind of comes off as really hokey, just due to the fact that something like that is designed to have one man left standing, right? Well, unfortunately, when you throw a tag team in there that is trying to establish itself and be more heelish, I guess, and this is a great way to generate heat, and the crowd ended up just being absolutely just hot, hated for these guys. Like, they hated these guys throughout the rest of the show. They had a match later on. A lot of wrestlers in this Battle Royal ended up having matches later on in the card too. So I think the only guys that you don't see again on the card are Ranger Ross, Ron Simmons, Scott Hall, and I think that's about it. Just those 3, just to round out the Battle Royal a little bit. And those 3 had been relatively new arrivals to NWA, WCW at the time as well. So they were just trying to establish themselves. Now, of course, those guys would end up being bigger stars, arguably, than Dan Spivey. Not so much Sid Vicious, but Dan Spivey definitely later on down the line. But, you know, it's a great appetite weather a little bit. The version on the network, I think, is pulled from the Turner Home Video version of it, because there's a cut from the intro of the show that Jim Ross and Bob Caudle are doing, kind of a goofy edit, and then they just jump right into the match with the production music and everything going on. So I think they might have spliced in a little bit, and the little disclaimer saying that, hey, this broadcast is not in its full entirety, but we present this to you in its most original form. Disclaimer shows up on the bottom at the network as well. So I think they're missing bits and pieces of this pay-per-view, but probably nothing that's worth talking about or anything. I'm sure if somebody has like a home video rip or a home video record of the pay-per-view off of their pay-per-view provider from back then, they could probably tell us exactly what we're missing. But the legendary Gordon Soley was handling backstage interviews, and they would go to him after every match to kind of tee up what was coming up in the next segment or something. Sometimes there would be a heel he'd be interviewing, sometimes there would be a face. It depends on who he would be able to get backstage, or who they decided to have Gordon work with to pump the match last minute to advertise what's upcoming, which is kind of a really cool feature of NWA, WCW pay-per-views of this era, especially from '89, having either Lance Russell or Gordon Soley, a trusted voice to a lot of fans in the South at that time, interview people. So he interviews Teddy Long, and Teddy Long's exact verbiage here says they're going to take care of everyone in the NWA. Well, they almost did. They kind of ran roughshod during the summer of '89 until they ran into the Road Warriors at Halloween Havoc, and that started to mark the end of the Skyscrapers tag team, as it was. Of course, Sid Vicious gets the singles push in 90 a little bit to work with Sting. And Spivey gets a brand new tag partner who ends up leaving the territory probably in the fall of 1990. Mean Mark was his name. I have no idea what ended up happening to him. If you do, put it in the comments below. Maybe he went one-on-one with The Undertaker. Match number 2 had longtime world-class championship wrestling villain Wild Bill Irwin go one-on-one with Flying Brian. This was early 89, well, kind of mid part of 89, so Brian Pillman is just getting established as the young hotshot babyface in NWA WCW at the time, whereas Wild Bill Irwin was one of the many kind of established wrestling talents that could fill out a very decent mid-card. Like, I think the card, like the roster from top down, rivaled that of WWF, if not exceeded WWF at the time. If you put both rosters side by side, I think the NWA WCW guys obviously had the better wrestlers. WWF just had the better production quality and more tools to get their program seen by more eyes at the time than Turner did, and so that's what initially gave WWF, the leg up going into the early 90s, was just the tools that they had. But anyways, back to the match. Wild Bill Irwin and Flying Brian put on a excellent encounter. The runtime for this one is about 10 minutes, so about 10:18 or so. And the finish of the match is quite spectacular itself, where we ended up seeing a spectacular flying crossbody from one ring to the other by Pillman, which is kind of cool because he kind of springboards from the ropes on ring 2 after being dumped over there and attacks kind of from the middle of the ring and kind of just crossbodies out on Irwin in the center of ring 1 for a 1-2-3. Remember that spot because it will show up in a match later on. It was kind of neat to watch two guys of the caliber of Flying Brian and the individual that we were going to talk about here a little later on go tit for tat over this. So this is really cool. Awesome match. Did what it needed to do. Flying Brian, of course, is on the ascendancy here. And Bill Irwin is just a veteran, not necessarily doing job duty, but doing job duty on a fairly high-profile event here at the Bash. So I imagine his payday was pretty good. And, going forward, Flying Brian would end up being a huge part of WCW's plans in 89, 90, and 91, culminating with the very first WCW light heavyweight title run, which was the forerunner to the WCW Cruiserweight title. Match number 3, the Dynamic Dudes take on the Skyscrapers, and of course, alluding back to the Battle Royal win from earlier, they have the check for $50,000, obviously a gimmick check, not a real check for $50,000, and the gimmick crown for the King of the Hill winner, kind of passed amongst the three of them. And then when the match starts, Teddy Long himself is wearing the crown at ringside and kind of showing off the check to people and, generating heat in that way. The Dynamic Dudes, Shane Douglas and Johnny Ace, when they walk out, they play Frisbee with a chubby kid in a Ghostbusters t-shirt in the front row. That was awkward. Whereas the Skyscrapers, when they walked out, Spivey almost jumped over the railing and attacked a child. So, hey, faces versus heels, they do what they do. This was a plotting, kind of slow match, and you can tell actually the fans starting to get behind already at this early juncture, the heel team before getting over to Dynamic Dudes. The Dudes gimmick never really took off in NWA WCW at that time. I think the culmination of it is the match that they had with who was it here as I go through things. Oh yeah, with the Freebirds for the World Tag Team titles at Halloween Havoc, and the crowd in Philadelphia is just 100% behind the Freebirds later that year. So, both guys and the dudes would be known later on for what they would do singles wise, and some, knowing what they would do outside of the ring after their in-ring time was done. Shane Douglas, of course, would be the franchise of ECW for so many years, and then one of the last big mid-card heels of WCW in its dying days in 2000 and in the year 2000, in 99 and 2000. And Johnny Ace would go over and become a huge star in Japan, and would be brought in as a talent relations coordinator in WCW, and then later on we know his track record in WWE. So again, these are two guys that would get more notoriety, but it's kind of cool watching them in their early steps here, in kind of their first formative years wrestling for a major promotion at this time in 1989. So a lot of future stars on this card. Match is over in 9:14. The power bomb is kind of botched at the end. There's a tandem power bomb that's kind of botched on Johnny, and then Spivey attempts a power bomb of his own that's kind of botched as well. Not as botched as Undertaker Goldberg from WWE Super Showdown, which I've seen gifs of this weekend, but nonetheless along the same lines. But Sid ended up becoming the master of the power bomb. We'll just put it that way, not so much a Dan Spivey thing. Match number 4, Jim Cornette versus Paul E. Dangerously. Yes, that's right. The manager of the current Midnight Express takes on the manager of the original Midnight Express at the time. This was a culmination of a feud that had been boiling through NWA and WCW for a few months at that time, which pretty much ended the run of the original Midnight Express. The pay-per-view before, I believe at Wrestle War, when they had the Loser Leaves Town match between what it was supposed to be Randy Rose, Dennis Condrey, and Stan Lane, Bobby Eaton, but Condrey no-showed the pay-per-view, and so they put Jack Victory in Condrey's spot to tag with Rose, and they ended up losing anyway. And so the original Midnight's gone, but still on TV, Dangerously and Cornette are still having their little feud and war of words and that stuff. And a straight-up wrestling match would have been great, but of course, it being the late 80s and WCW, it has to be a gimmick, so we get a tuxedo match. And in the forerunner before the Attitude Era, where we would get the bra and panties matches and stuff like that, the tuxedo matches for the guys, a little less visually enticing, we'll put it that way, but it was still a pretty funny match. Of course, Cornette infamously tells the story of Dangerously working the wrong knee after they built up the storyline around Dangerously attacking the knee throughout, so that's a thing for sure. It is what it is. 6 minutes 22. Fast forward for this one if you're not a fan of managers going at it. I'm a fan of Cornette's verbal ability, so that's why I watched it. But you're not. It's not Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels, we'll put it that way, or a Ricky Steamboat versus Ric Flair type performance here. This is two managers going at it in the ring. Simple as that. Fifth match was a Texas Tornado tag match between the Varsity Club of Kevin Sullivan and Mike Rotunda taking on the Steiner brothers, Rick and Scott Steiner. They had Missy Hyatt with them as a valet at the time. And this is another long-standing feud that kind of floats through 89 between the Varsity Club and the Steiners, because Rick Steiner was a former member of the Varsity Club. So ergo, he branches out on his own, becomes popular. Varsity Club decides, no, we can't have that. And then they build this heel machine, and then this allows them to bring Scott aboard. And of course, 89 is not Scott's rookie year in a major promotion, because he had wrestled in UWF and a few other places before, but kind of more of the lines of kind of his first national exposure or international exposure, as a wrestler. And yeah, the Steiner brothers tag team kind of takes off from there as 1990 becomes a huge year for the Steiners. But in '89, they're still trying to find their way a little bit. Yeah, I think a 4:22 runtime, 4 minutes and 22 is perfect for this. It hid a lot of the shortcomings that the Steiners had at the time for it. Meltzer gave this one, let's see, 3 stars. So, kind of an average run of the road for this one. This is more of a brawl than anything else. It being a Texas Tornado tag, no tags needed or anything like that. Or I believe this is also called in some circles, in territory league circles and that stuff, as an Australian rules tag match, where there is no tags. There's just or nowadays it's just no DQ, no tags, whatever. And a tandem cross-body maneuver gets the Steiners the win at the 4:22 mark. The brawl on the outside is hilarious because with one of the celebrity cameos at the time and that stuff, you see Jason Hervey just run for his life because I think he was at ringside as a special guest, either ring announcer or timekeeper for the entire card for the Great American Bash and that stuff. And then he just say, "Hey, that's the dude from the Wonder Years." Okay. He's just bolting through the crowd, so whatever. Match 6 is one of the big matches on the card. It is for the World Television title, back when the World Television title actually meant something on NWA WCW programming. It is the undefeated at the time Great Muta taking on Sting. And of course, this is Muta's first real venture into North America a little bit on, the classic New Japan expedition that all wrestlers were doing, or Japanese expedition. The guys in All Japan were doing it now. Nowadays, it's New Japan that does it. And he was on a incredible unbeaten streak. This was the original undefeated streak, years, about 10 years before Goldberg had his, 8 or 9 years before Goldberg had his. Muta was beating guys left, right, and center on WCW TV and ended up winning the World Television title later on down the line in 1989. But at this time, Sting was the World TV champion. Muta was the hot, undefeated champion. The World TV title actually meant something. And so, put him in the ring. Let's see what happens. And at the time, the World TV title kind of stood as... It was like the Prospects title. The guys that were... A lot of the guys that were holding it were guys that were either brand new to national audiences or guys that were marked as kind of like, okay, they're the next big thing, but right now they're the big thing on the mid card. So that's kind of a fair assumption for it. This match is phenomenal. It's such a great thing. Remember that cross body spot I was telling you earlier with the Brian Bill Irwin match? Well, it repeats itself here, except Sting goes from ring 1 to ring 2 with it. Kind of a reverse flying crossbody. That's in the early moments of the match too. It's wild. Kind of a battle of can you top this. It's more impressive seeing a guy of Sting's size at the time do that maneuver over a flying Brian, but you can tell that those guys were kind of copying off of each other, kind of 1A, 1B at the time. Very cool to see. Huge pop for Sting when he is announced, and the crowd is on its feet already. Like this match is just, it's a show stealer. So Meltzer gave this match 3 3/4 stars, so almost a 4-star rating on this match. So fairly exemplary. The finish is a little bit weird and was designed to create an angle going forward that people could talk about a little bit, and that we'll explain a little bit later on as the card continues. But to me, I find the finish really weird. It's one of those classic pinfall happens after a back suplex type spots where both guys get their shoulder up at the last second for free, and the ref only sees that Sting has his shoulder up and Muta has his shoulder down, but Muta has his opposite shoulder up and Sting had his opposite shoulder down, right? So again, one of those strange double pin finishes, but it's to build up something later on in the card and what would be NWA and WCW's big angle going into the fall and leading into the very first Halloween Havoc pay-per-view at the end of October. We find out later on that the television title has been held up and that it has been essentially declared vacant, but both Great Muta and Sting would be considered the top 2 contenders at the end of this card for the TV title. Next matchup is a classic. You have Lex Luger, the United States heavyweight champion at the time, take on Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Of course, Steamboat had just recently lost his #1 contendership rating to Terry Funk at the Clash of the Champions in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, just prior to this. And this is back when NWA and WCW actually paid attention to the top 10 ranking system. So you would have the champion, the #1 contender, and then the #2 contender would typically be the U.S. champion. So this, of course, is Steamboat's ammo. He wants to get back into the title picture. Why not go after the U.S. heavyweight champion? And there was great creative leading up to this in the months and weeks leading into the Great American Bash, where Luger attacked Steamboat, and Steamboat wanted this match to be a no disqualification match. They tricked Luger into signing a contract into making it a no disqualification match, but then Luger fires back the day of the pay-per-view, and actually the last second before the match starts, saying that he won't get into the ring unless the NWA and the promoters of the NWA say, hey, this is unfair. It's got to be a normal rules wrestling match, to which Steamboat, of course being classic good guy, says, go ahead, I'm cool with it, whatever. And so it's a classic one-on-one contest, and this is great. This is one of Luger's best matches in his first WCW run. One of Steamboat's underrated matches, in my opinion. This thing garnered 4 1/4 stars via the Wrestling Observer and Dave Meltzer. And this match went for 10:26 until inevitably a chair is introduced, and until Luger inevitably brings a chair into the party, wants to use the chair with the referee's back turned. Steamboat fights the chair away from Luger, uses the chair on Luger, but then the ref sees Steamboat using the chair, and of course that's a disqualification. So again, another great quick 10-minute affair, but this is one of the most underrated Luger matches from his first run, or one of Luger's great matches in his first run is what I'm trying to say, and one of Steamboat's underrated matches, in my opinion, from the 80s, just because he had such a great decade of matches with a bevy of opponents, for sure. The semifinal, or the semi-main event, was, of course, the NWA WCW Great American Bash Classic War Games 4. That's right, this is the 4th War Games match to be held during a Great American Bash, or a Great American Bash on tour, or any of the predecessors of this in the series of War Games matches. The heel side consists of the Fabulous Freebirds, so Michael Hayes, Terry Bam Bam Gordy, and the NWA WCW Freebird, Jimmy Jam Garvin, and the Samoan SWAT team, so Samu, and a very early Rikishi Fatu. So this is Rikishi, again, another one of these great stars, very early on in his career that we see national exposure for the first time, pretty much. Paulie Dangerously is in the corner of the heels because he managed the Samoan SWAT team. Of course, this was his replacement team to come in after the original Midnights got booted out of the territory to pay-per-view before. Their opponents on the face side was the only team to be in every War Games match up to this point. The Road Warriors, Animal and Hawk, with Precious Paul Ellering in their corner. The Midnight Express as well, Bobby Eaton, Stan Lane, with Dr. Death, Steve Williams, and Jim Cornette rounding out that team as well. So you had a two-manager led face team with a heel manager, and I guess pretty much Michael Hayes is kind of a secondary player coach, if you will, on the heel side. This match runs 22:18. It's your classic War Games match with a few changes. There is no visible coin toss in this match. They just mentioned that earlier on, before the event began, there was a coin toss in the back, and the heel side, the team of the Freebirds and the Samoans, ended up winning the coin toss, so they get the man advantage. I don't think I've ever seen a War Games match before where, especially from this era, where the faces ever got the advantage on it. It's kind of the trope of the War Games, is that the heels will always get the man advantage as the periods go on, as people enter the cage and that stuff. And you know what? I think that it's the cleanest fought of any War Games match that we see. We don't see really a lot of blood or anything. It's nowhere near the original War Games match where people's shoulders were getting broken legit in this thing, and people getting busted open and whatever. This thing was a fairly mild War Games match, but the personalities in it made it what it was. So it was a very passable. It's one of my favorite War Games matches I've seen out of all of them, out of the lineage of the War Games, including when they've brought it back every November for the NXT people. Meltzer gave the 89 War Games match a 4-star rating in the Wrestling Observer, and this pretty much garners all 4 stars. The face side gets the win when Hawk grabs Jimmy Garvin, who ended up starting the match for the heel side. Bobby Eaton started the match for the face side, and there's a modified Doomsday device due to the height of the cage on Jimmy Garvin, which leads to kind of like a hangman's guillotine choke that Animal is implementing on Garvin at the time that the ref will physically run in from the outside. The ref wasn't in the match the entire time. He just runs in to see if somebody gives up or not, and runs into ring 1 where nobody else is fighting. Everybody else is over in ring 2, and the submission is there. So, kind of, that's pro wrestling. That's the show aspect of it for the finish, but you got it. The big takeaway out of this match was the heel side locking Animal in the cage and attacking him for a good 2 or 3 minutes after the fall was done, because the faces immediately peter out with their arms in victory like they've won. But the heel side of the Freebirds and the Samoans end up just, grabbing Animal and just tearing him apart in the cage, where finally the faces will jump in and attack the heel side, and chase them out, but only after the damage is done. We kind of power away fairly quickly back to Gordon Soley in the announce position as they're trying to move things along, it looks like. But this match would set up the Road Warriors opponents leading into Halloween Havoc for the rest of the summer and the fall, pretty much. Then the Skyscrapers get introduced as the opponents for the Road Warriors in October. Very strong tag team division at the time in 89 and 90 in the NWA, WCW. Almost stronger than WWF at the time. I'd actually put them as the stronger division for sure. And of course, the 4.5 star is awarded upon by Dave Meltzer main event for the NWA WCW World Heavyweight title. Terry Funk taking on the returning Ric Flair. Now, of course, this stems from the prior pay-per-view where Flair finally beat Steamboat in the third of their classic trilogy of matches back in 1989. And Terry Funk utilizing the table for the first time to a national audience and pile driving Ric Flair through a table for what has to have been the first instance of it, leading to the big feud between Funk and Flair. Funk, of course, weasels his way into the number 1 contendership by beating Steamboat at the last Clash, and then Flair will come in to wrestle Funk, not having wrestled since. And of course, Flair hasn't wrestled a match since Wrestle War, so there's your feud going into the main event. And man, what a main event it is. It is, it's not as out of control as the I Quit match is later on in the year on the Clash of Champions, nor is it as theatrical as the Halloween Havoc Thunder Cage match. Maybe we'll review that a little bit later on the channel. But it is a great match. It's a classic one-on-one encounter. It shows up on all of the DVD sets when WWE releases anything on Flair or Funk or the NWA or what have you. It's one of the classic NWA title encounters. So the match itself runs for about 17:23, with Ric Flair getting the win via an inside cradle at the 17:23 mark. But then the post-match shenanigans go on and on and on in this thing, where you got Great Muta running out to attack Flair, and he sprays the mists in the eyes, and Flair's been busted open earlier, so you have a look where Ric Flair at the very end of it all, when he's getting interviewed by Jim Ross, and Bob Caudle has kind of the green mist on one side and the red blood on the other, and he kind of looks like a Christmas tree. So it's a weird kind of a weird way, surreal way to end a pay-per-view. But Sting runs out because of the TV title thing earlier and attacks, and then there's a bond, there's a tag team, there's a friendship, we think, between Ric Flair and Sting, because there's a common enemy now, because Gary Hart has aligned himself with Terry Funk and the Great Muta and has created the JTEX Corporation, and we'll see JTEX and Flair and Sting kind of butt heads for the rest of the summer into the fall into Starrcade, and that's when, of course, the big reveal is dropped and Sting becomes the fourth member of the Horsemen that they were looking for the entire time, which leads into February of 90, and we all know what happens there. So this is very formulative to what would happen a year later with Sting finally beating Flair for the World Heavyweight title here. But this was kind of the beginning of that year-long title reign at this point, and trying to establish Funk as that credible lead heel on the show, which they have. And again, phenomenal match, phenomenal pay-per-view from top to bottom. I give this thing a 9 out of 10, even watching it today. It's a solid watch. Go out and watch it if you haven't had the chance. Alright folks, that's all I have for now on this. Be sure to like and subscribe if you like this type of stuff. If you really like me digging through these classic pay-per-views, let me know, and maybe next month we'll do it again. Alright folks, later days, happy wrestling watching. We'll see ya.